In the last video, we traced the path of blood through the heart, one chamber at a time, but it's important to remember that both sides of the heart are undergoing the same sequence of events at the same time. So both the left and the right atria fill with blood, and then the atria contract, forcing that blood through the AV valves, filling the ventricles. Now that slight contraction, anytime we have a contraction of a chamber of the heart, that's referred to as systole. So that was atrial systole, a period of contraction in the heart. And then, of course, the next step would be the ventricles contracting, pushing that blood through the semilunar valves, and that would be ventricular systole. And that is the period when there is the greatest blood pressure in the body. Of course, that left ventricle really giving a big squeeze to the blood and creating a high blood pressure during ventricular systole. Now the periods of relaxation, like when the chambers fill, so during this time the atria are relaxed and they're filling with blood, and that's called diastole, anytime that there's a period of relaxation. So then atrial systole will fill the ventricles with blood, and at that time the ventricles are undergoing diastole because they're relaxed after having just contracted. During diastole is when we have the lowest blood pressure occurring during the cardiac cycle, that period when the ventricles are relaxed. And of course then ventricular systole occurs, pushing that blood out. And so when a blood pressure measurement is taken, it's reported as the systolic pressure, the highest blood pressure, over the diastolic pressure, the lowest. And this is an excellent index to any possible cardiovascular problems. Those two periods of the cardiac cycle, systole and diastole, create the lub-dub sound of the heartbeat, the two-beat rhythm of the heartbeat. Let's take a closer look at that. So during systole, when the ventricles contract, that's forcing the blood through the semilunar valves, but it's also slamming shut those atrioventricular valves, and it's the shutting of those valves that creates the first part of the heartbeat, the lub. Then the second part of the heartbeat is caused by the relaxation of those ventricles during diastole as they fill with blood from the atria through the atrioventricular valves. That lower pressure in the ventricles after having just contracted slams shut the semilunar valves at the same time, creating the dub sound of the heartbeat. Okay. Now let's shift our attention to the vessels of the cardiovascular system. We already talked about the difference between arteries and veins as far as the transport of blood through them. Arteries always carry blood away from the heart, and veins carry blood into the heart. So now let's take a look at some of the structural differences between arteries and veins. So one of the first things we noticed with the artery on the left and the vein on the right here is that the artery has a lot smaller diameter or cross-sectional area than does the vein. Now this is forcing the same volume of blood through a smaller cross-sectional area increases blood pressure. And of course we have high blood pressure coming out of the heart, out of the left ventricle into the aorta, because we need that blood to go all throughout the body. We need that high pressure. And so the smaller diameter of the artery maintains that high pressure. And we also notice that the artery walls are much thicker, more muscular than the walls of the vein. And of course that has everything to do with that high blood pressure. We need a nice strong reinforced wall on those arteries because of that higher pressure. So the thicker walls are built to withstand that higher pressure. Now veins have one more thing different from arteries, and that's the fact that they have these venous valves inside them that prevent backflow. Now these valves work much the same way the valves inside the heart work. They're one-way valves that will slam shut, preventing any backflow. So we can see in this video here the direction of blood flow going through a vein and actually see those flaps opening to permit that blood flow. Now anytime there's poor circulation, especially in the legs, we can get backflow, which stretches these veins and leads to a condition known as varicose veins. Okay, finally, where we actually exchange all the nutrients and oxygen and all the substances the blood are carrying for our cells, where that exchange actually happens with the cells is over these fine capillary beds. So capillary beds are these very small extensions, the smallest extensions of the cardiovascular system, of the blood vessels, that are in very close proximity to every cell in your body. Now, the blood flow is always from the artery to the vein across a capillary bed. And you see, as we get the smaller and smaller divisions of the blood vessels, they get special names as well, like arterioles and venules, and so on. Anyhow, the blood crosses over the capillary bed, and in the process, because the cell layer is only one cell thick on these capillaries, then diffusion is allowed to happen, and we get things like oxygen moving down the concentration gradient into cells and carbon dioxide moving down its concentration gradient back into the bloodstream. All that is made possible by the extreme thinness of the capillary beds.